So there, now we know the time delay.
Yep, quite a big one.
Awesome.
It's 11, so I'm happy to
Yeah,
put our videos on.
let's do it. And do you want to stop sharing?
Yep,
Do you think I need to press record here or is it automatically
it's
recording?
automatic, I think.
Okay, let's trust that. Well, let's get started. Welcome, Heather Luna. It's so great to see you. I've been looking forward to this conversation enormously. So I think we're just going to kick off. If you're all right with that, I'll ask you to introduce yourself. I'll return the favor. And then as folks are coming in with questions, we'll see what's there and or you and I have a few questions prepared already for this conversation that no one's having.
Yay! Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. And I'm a coach, facilitator, consultant, trainer in many areas. But for the purpose of this conversation, I will just highlight that I work with individuals and organizations on value purpose alignment, as well as how to improve organizational systems, such as the feedback culture of an organization. And that means that I work with individuals sometimes around communication skills that are necessary to be able to challenge, raise concerns with your employer, the organization with which you work. I also do work on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this is related to how to create the conditions so that everyone can offer their best thinking towards the purpose of the organization or the company. So, in order to do this, we need to take into account the different ways that people contribute because everyone has different needs and different challenges affected by different oppressions, different ways that we talk to ourselves and feel confident or not in what we do. And so that's what I do, working with individuals and organizations and companies on these challenges and how to have an organization that functions in a state of flow, delivering its purpose and possibly its vision. What about you, Lorraine?
Oh, well, first, I'm just being reminded of the potential and power of what you do. I've been a great admirer and I've benefited greatly from your skills. So thank you so much for joining me here. Um, and so what I'm up to, actually, I'm just double checking if we are live. Okay, good. It's finally catching up. I can see it catching up there. So, yeah, so for those who don't know me, I'm an independent writer, researcher, advisor, and coach. I hold a vision of an economy that works in service of life, and I aim to contribute to and guide others to contribute in service of that economy. It's a little different than the one we have right now. So we're working collectively to create a world where in my focus area, where all industries, so that's all industry sectors from energy, mining, oil and gas to food, pharma, tech, all sectors are making humans healthier in restoring thriving and healthy ecosystems. And that's a pretty big job, and there's a lot of work to do. So that can mean a lot of different things. For me, it generally means listening for areas where that's happening, where people are thriving, where business models are contributing to a life affirming economy, learning from those folks, understanding what were the conditions. And Heather, I love how you reminded us in your intro the importance of just creating the conditions. It's not flipping a switch, it's not insisting or demanding or convincing. It's creating the conditions for people to thrive in their workplaces, in their communities, and for our ecological home to thrive. And so I spend time researching and looking for where is that happening? How does it work? What does it mean? And also a lot of time with folks who are still in the sort of sustainability as usual or business as usual community, sensing that things aren't quite working, sensing there's a lot more to do that's way beyond what corporate sustainability asks for today. And I guide them to what I call bring reality to ESG and sustainability. And that could be quite disruptive and transformative, really looking at how to break out of patterns that don't work and move towards patterns that do. And I guess the last thing I'd say on that front is that might be about individuals in their jobs. So what is my job as a sustainability professional? How can I really contribute to real change, not just stay really busy and burn out, but really make change? And it can also be at the team level, where more and more there are folks sort of waking up going, huh, there seems to be something about the business model here at this wider company that's bigger than my job, and I'm not too sure what to do about it. And in fact, that's what kind of leads us here today. So maybe I'll set this conversation up a little bit more to explain what brings you and I together here, and then we'll jump in from there. And anybody who's joining us in the live session that's happening Friday, March 28th, noon Eastern time. So if you're watching the recording, that's where this is all beginning. Those who are watching live, please feel free to chime in with questions. We have a couple already loaded up that have come my way. In fact, that's what prompted this conversation. But if you have questions as well, we'd love to hear from you. And so, what brought us here today is this awareness that comes towards me quite a bit with sustainability professionals, ESG. They might be strategy within corporate headquarters. They might be working with corporate clients. They might be advisors or consultants in their own right doing ESG, environmental, social, and governance, or sustainability work. And they're aware, they're well aware of the gap that we talk about a fair bit, but they're not sure how to talk about it within their companies because most executive teams have not assigned any of us, hey, could you please rewire the business model today? And many of these companies are huge. They employ thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, at least indirectly, of people. They are multi-billion dollar, sometimes multi-hundred billion dollar companies. So to just, tweak the business model is not, it's not really on anyone's job description. And yet there's this growing awareness that, well, if we don't do that, this is pretty what we're bumping up against in terms of the social and environmental challenges, crises even, we're in bigger trouble. So we have really big challenges and we're not sure how to talk about them. We're not even sure what it has to do with our jobs. And so Heather, you and I were sort of chatting about that a bit, and I realized that you and your skill set in navigating really difficult conversations within the workplace and also just within our own kind of inner spaces. It's a superpower. It's something that I've really benefited from and drawn on. And so I thought I'd love to see what you would guide us to think about and to spar a little bit with you in real time on some of the questions that come up. So that's what brings us here. I'm wondering if there's anything else you want to say by way of introduction before I read one of the opening questions that has come my way in advance of this.
No, I'm super eager to get going on questions. Let's do it.
All right, cool. So I'm actually just going to read this question, and it's a hard one. And to be honest, although this is a real live question from a real live human being with a name and a dear friend, somebody I care about very much, it's actually almost a direct paraphrasing of very similar questions I've heard from a number of people in recent days. So this is not unique. It's a big part of why we wanted to have this conversation. So here's the question. Or here's the statement, actually. Um, I have a senior role at a Fortune 500 company. I have responsibility for climate targets and stakeholder relations. I know the problems that we're facing are more complex and interconnected than we'd recognized before. In fact, the whole business model is connected to these issues. But it's not really my job to address that. So remember, this person's job is to set strategy and manage stakeholder relations. It's not really my job to address the business model. In fact, it's no one's job. I feel like, so as a result of this, I feel like I literally have to leave my soul outside the building when I go into work each day. How do I even start this conversation? Heather.
That is such an incredibly deep and important question. Someone talking about their soul. This isn't like a light question. It's quite existential, like a crisis that they're feeling around their life of integrity, right? They it sounds like they want a life grounded in values and that they have a vision for the world and that there's a big gap between what they want to be contributing to the world and what they're actually doing in their life. And so when I coach somebody in this kind of dilemma, I do like to start with looking at what is their vision for the world. And I learned this technique from the community called Nonviolent Global Liberation, and they have a process called vision mobilization, which is really beautiful. And I'll put a link to it later. But we want to be able to let our mind go as big as it can toward a vision of a world that works for everyone. What do you think that would look like? And in fact, for the exercise, we don't need to be held back by physics or anything. We can say, imagine you've got a magic wand. What would you want the world to look like?
Mhm.
And the reason we start with this is because it brings out our deepest longings. It brings out like the values and the qualities that are most important to us. And that is the next step, to draw out those values, because we can then apply those values that we obviously care so much about to every part of our lives, how we are in relationship with one another, how we choose to spend our time, how we use our gifts, our strengths, our skills. And and then we do take some time to look at our own capacity. What are we good at? What do people say we're good at? What are our strengths? What are our gifts? Because that can help us determine what is our purpose in the world. What is ours to do in the world that will help close that gap between the way the world is now and the way that we want it to be. And so this keeps us very grounded in our vision and values. And of course, that can change with time. Our strengths can change. We could do a course and learn something, and we have an increased capacity around something. And so then our purpose changes. But the point of the exercise is to, number one, to free up our capacity to be able to mourn that there is a big gap. We are leaving our souls in the car park. And that is so far from where we want the world to be. And if we don't acknowledge this, then we're actually spending a lot of energy keeping those feelings down and like pretending they don't exist, when that energy would be better spent on building the kind of world that we want. And then number two, the second reason we want to do this is so that we can orient ourselves towards what we actually want and what we can
Mhm.
do. And so it helps us plan, it helps us be in alignment with our values. So I say all that because going back to the original question on how to have this conversation at work, the more grounded we are in our vision and values, the easier it will be to be confident in having that conversation. And the next step in my mind would be to sort of do what you just did for yourself, but for the company. What are the values of the company, the vision, the purpose, or the values, purpose and mission, wherever they are on the website, right? And you want to check for alignment. Is there alignment between the values and what the company is actually doing? And if there's not, then this is a way to address it, because you're basing it on reality. You're saying, I see some misalignment here. Now, let's suppose that they are in alignment, but you think that it's missing something. Well, you have that conversation and you could say something like, I know I have responsibility for climate targets and stakeholder relations, but I don't feel like I'm given the agency to do my job in the way that it deserves to be done, in a way that it would be grounded within the values of the company. So, how could we amend the values to be able to attend to the kind of impact that I want to make around climate targets and the kind of relationships that I want to be able to have with stakeholders? So, I mean, this person that you've brought up here does have a senior role. And something that I love sharing with people is called convergent facilitation. And that was developed by Mickey Cashton. And it's a way to bring people together to hear what's really important to each person, so that any decision that is made will be more likely to have follow through, that there'll be more willingness to go along with the decision. So if you're someone who manages stakeholder relations, then you could bring together stakeholders to talk about climate targets and to say, to each stakeholder, what is important to you about this climate target? And you say that to each person in the room. And you want in the room, like all the people who actually are going to take the decision in the end. You want those people there. You want the people who would be implementing the decisions. You want all the people who will be impacted by the decisions. And when you go around the room, this is where the skill of the facilitator is important, because you want to have what people say be sort of transformed in a way where everyone can agree that this is important. It's like based on universal human needs here. So, for example, someone could say, you could be an indigenous community, right? That says, I want to protect the water in that area. And someone else who lives in the city, lives maybe in a different country or something, is like, that isn't important to me because I can get water from out of the taps in my house, something like that. And so you'd go a bit deeper, and the person who said that water was important to them would probably end up saying, yeah, it's because I want generations to come to have access to what they need to survive. And
Mhm.
that wealthy, let's say, Fortune 500 stakeholder who's trying to protect their profits, if you get down deep, they're likely to say something about wanting to be able to provide for their grandchildren and their grandchildren. And that's why they want this money, to be able to meet those needs. So, although one person is talking about water and the other is talking about money, they'll probably both be able to agree that getting the needs met of their descendants is equally important to them. And so, through this exercise, through this convergent facilitation process, you're like creating a list of criteria that are important to everyone in the room around any decision with regard to those climate targets. And that's the first phase. The second phase would be to come together, come up with proposals, trying to attend to all the criteria. Like, so you're doing your best to come up with a proposal that's gonna like make everyone happy. But we'll see through that process that there isn't probably a proposal that's going to fit all the criteria. But because everyone's heard each other, and because people will know what's actually possible, people are more likely in the third phase to go along with the decision that gets made, because they will see what the reality is on which this decision is based. And I've simplified that quite a bit, but the point being that you spoke about business models earlier, and this is a chance for people to be really honest that we are talking about a business model. We shouldn't pretend that there isn't one underneath all of this. And, maybe businesses should be putting as their values on their website, we put profit over people. We put we put profit over the planet, if they're going to be entirely honest, because that's the reality of a capitalist business model. But being able to speak about this openly creates a space, I think, for people to have conversations about the challenges and the impact that this has on people and stakeholders. So that's where I would go with it.
Oh, I love it, Heather. You're reminding me why I wanted to have this conversation with you. I'm going to provide a few reflections, sort of as best as I am able, putting myself in the shoes of the folks who ask this question to me, just to kind of play it back a little, and then come back with another question. And by the way, there's some chiming in the chat. Renee, great to see you here, and we're doing our best to track all that. So feel free to put additional questions if there's things on your mind. But first, I just want to reflect back what you are describing, this notion of alignment of purpose. It's sort of funny how like basic and obvious it is, and how not talked about it is. And I really appreciate how you brought both the personal and the professional, because this whole idea of having to leave your soul out in the parking lot, or maybe in the bike rack, or somewhere along the way in the subway on the way to work, like that's really painful, right? That's like saying I can't I'm here for all the reasons because I love elements of my job, because I'm providing for my family, because I'm learning a lot, because this is what I'm trained to do. There's a host of very real reasons why we're there. And then there's this real pain, this gap that you talked about, the opportunity even to grieve this gap. Like it's real. That your soul is not welcome on the job. That's massive. That's bigger than any corporate bonus. So that notion of alignment, I would say it really does directly parallel the corporate purpose misalignment that we often see. Because you look at a lot of companies, like Google's my favorite one to mention off the top, because I did a deep assessment on them, because they're a verb, they're a household name, everybody knows them. And their stated purpose is to make the world's data accessible to everyone everywhere. But what they actually do, for the most part, to earn their hundreds of billions US in revenue a year is sell advertising. And of course, those things are not mutually exclusive, but they're also not the same. And they're certainly not the same in terms of purpose. So I I guess one of the things I particularly love about calling up the relationship between the personal and the professional and the corporate purpose is because when we realize that there's a personal misalignment, we realize we have agency. It's very empowering. It can be scary, but it's also very empowering. It gets past the, oh yeah, I have to change the business model, and brings us to, oh no, but I can change how and where I show up. And so I think that's very empowering, if kind of daunting, and we'll get to the daunting in just a sec. You mentioned a couple resources and ideas. So I just wanted to note, we'll make sure that any of those awesome specific resources will be linked, if not in the chat, then in the notes that will follow in the recording. And so I'm going to add another. Those of you not familiar yet with my materiality process, it's designed to do exactly that, to bring reality into what is most material to the business. And it begins with looking at the alignment of purpose. What is the stated purpose of this company? What is its actual purpose? And then what is needed instead? And it really builds on that expansive sort of magic wand given to your heart visioning that you offer, Heather. And so it's a free methodology. Anyone can download it and use it to your heart's content, and maybe your soul's content as well. So please make use of that. There's very specific frameworks, questions, and steps you can take. It doesn't have to be all in your, in the painful part of your soul that's left outside. Which brings me to the next question. So what I often hear from folks, so listening to the process you just described and imagining nothing was in the way, we had all the time in the world, our bosses, although we're senior, the reality is even these senior folks have several very prohibiting layers between them and like real decision making. So some folks will indeed be part of those kinds of stakeholder engagement exercises. Maybe once a year, they're doing a big facilitation with a really wide range of stakeholders. And so the kind of methodology you just described, and anyone listening, I really hope you will take very careful notes about the process Heather just described. If you are involved in stakeholder engagement, that is gold. Like, build in that kind of facilitation, and what you bring is the potential for real common ground versus just the company talking at stakeholders, listening for a while, and then going back to doing what they were doing. But I can hear a number of folks saying, okay, but that's not my job right now, or it's part of my job, but I don't really have free rein to do what you just described. That's too big right now. In fact, I'm really just trying to deal with my own shit, right? Like, I'm really just trying to deal with my struggle in this role without changing my whole to-do list, without having to pitch something new to my boss, without having to get more resources because we're constantly resource constrained. So what do you say to folks who, and again, this is like I'm condensing 30 recent conversations into 2 words, but Heather, that kind of thinking, even if we don't do the engagement process, we just do the personal work, it's not practical. It's not realistic because it isn't what we're supposed to be working on now. How would you guide folks to, even like without new tasks, without new, key performance indicators, how would you guide them to even begin the conversation that feels so taboo that even raising it, much less having follow-up to-dos, is like, electric fence, can't go there. What guidance would you offer them?
Well, I would go back to that first bit around alignment, like just to be able to say to coworkers or something, like, I'm not sure we are in alignment.
Mm,
Just that very basic, like, um, question of alignment. And although you're saying what you would say to other people, that inner process that I described at the very beginning of your own vision for the world and your own values, your own purpose, I think that will kind of answer the question of what you need
mhm,
to do next, because it will point out like what you're good at, what your role is. Is your role going to be to have these kinds of conversations about alignment? Is your role going to be to skill up enough so that you can add more things to your to-do list and challenge like how stakeholder relations are normally done? Like I think that is that first piece is where you will find what to do next.
mhm.
um, and of course, you and I both know that some people doing that exercise may say, actually, I need to leave. Like I can't bring my soul to this job, and
Mm.
I'd rather have an honest job where we're not pretending what our vision, values, purpose, mission are. It's not honest, and that could be where you go next. And I think that's a completely valid position, and I call it an honest job because I've worked in education for sustainable development in universities in the UK, and I think that some people have jobs in sustainability because it feels like at least on my deathbed I'll be able to say that I was trying to do something. But if we're being honest, in some cases that isn't like the might not be the best use of your time and energy, is to be in a job that has the word sustainability in it. Like that isn't actually moving you closer to the world that you want. So to be able to uh, face that, and you might discover that your job for pay is going to be something more honest, and that it's in your free time that you'll be doing things that are bringing you closer to the world that you want.
Yeah, that answer really lands. And I'm going to offer a few comments and reflection, and then there's a question in the chat from Renee that I'd like to get to as well. So one of the things that you're touching on here when you describe how to navigate this, which might involve recognizing you are ready to change places, change gears, change opportunities where you give your energy and get paid in return. I definitely hear that a lot. And one of the interesting, let's say, responses that comes to that is, well, I can't. Like, I have to stay where I am. And so I have to fix the problem here. And what I really appreciate that you're lifting up is just a recognition that whether we like that or not, sometimes we really do need to look at, is this ours to fix? And is it fixable? And I mean, obviously, yeah, and you and I are both examples. We've made some pretty big pivots in what we do professionally and with whom and how and where and why. Certainly for me, I felt it was, I needed to do honest work, as you say, and so I made a pretty big swivel. But I will say I was slow to the learning, because in a number of cases stayed more or less where I was. I could argue that I was shifting and doing things differently, but I kept trying to change things from within. And I just want to honor my past self and all of the current and past and maybe future selves out there that, this isn't about a judgment of, you're doing something wrong or, you should really, these are really challenging experiences that come with both increasing awareness, light bulbs go on, things you didn't understand that you do now, things you didn't see before that you do now, needs that you have that you didn't have before. Um, and the conditions are changing. So it's, you're no fool for staying in a job that doesn't feel good. And then, we all confront choices and we have different impetuses and reasons for doing what we do. But I do want to highlight, like, if you're sitting with that, well, but I'm going to keep trying here, maybe also sit with, but it might not work, and you do have choices, and some of them might be harder than others, but we really do all have choices. And as somebody who tried to fix things from within for quite a while, I ultimately came to the conclusion that it either wasn't fixable or it wasn't mine to fix. And both of those conclusions meant my soul force, my life force, my time, uh, my expertise, my energy, my joie de vivre belongs somewhere else. But if you can gather up your agency and take that vision, I love that personal visioning that you talked about, Heather. If you can bring that personal visioning into where you are and say, hey, folks, here's something, and there's appetite for it, and there's energy, and there's enthusiasm, and there's resource, real resource. Um, then keep going, right? Like allow that vision to expand and unfold and be with where you are working now. And so to that end, I want to offer a quick 3-part process that I've done with a lot of folks. I use it on myself all the time, and it's very powerful. It's a parallel to what you described, Heather, that kind of expansive, allowing yourself to vision. And what I've noticed is a lot of corporate folks, maybe a lot of people, but most of the ones I talk to are in a corporate context. They've actually never done this before. And it's kind of shocking given how much we're trying to do. So there's 3 questions. And the first question is, what do you seek to change? And specifically, from what to what? Because with a lot of sustainability folks, they're so tired, they're so burnt out, they're so busy on so many things, that when you actually ask, what is it you're trying to change? You get this kind of like, well, climate, or like equality or diversity and inclusion, or like topics that are important and merit some real change. But like, what are you trying to change? From what to what? Just like more documentation or more like appearances at conferences? Probably not. And when you really drop into that question, what is it you seek to change? It's like this now. And I want to say specifically, it's going to be like that when the change is true. It can really light up some real specific possibilities. And again, that agency piece. And then, so first question is, what do you seek to change? By the way, what I seek to change is that there are more decision makers in business who believe in the compelling vision of an economy that serves life. Like they've had the thought, which most of them haven't. I can say, having talked to them, why would the economy say, oh yeah, I guess that's kind of what it's here for, right? So that there are more decision makers who believe in the compelling nature of that vision, going from pretty much zero to lots more. That's the change I seek. So question 2 is, well, what does it feel like when that change is true? And that's really aligned with that visioning process you talked about, Heather. So anyone listening to the recording, or if you didn't hear this first, double back to how Heather described that, like really going in there. This is an imaginative process. This is giving your heart the steering wheel for a little while. Let your analytical mind of why nots and what abouts just get back out into the parking lot. Go meet your soul and send your soul in. And then sit with, yeah, what would it be like if that change were true? And allow the textures and the sensory notion and the expansion that becomes possible when that is true. Just be with that for a little bit. And it's quite meditative. I've led many people every Monday for the last almost year now. I've been leading folks on a group journey around this, and almost without fail, there are tears because there's an awareness that well, first of all, it's a beautiful feeling. Like it's a very beautiful feeling to let that truth be alive in you. And then there's some pain around, like, golly, it's a little different. So then the third question is you come back to kind of everyday regular breathing and you ask, what's one thing I can do now? Or what's one thing I can do this week to make that change come true? And again, that agency pops up inevitably. There is something, and maybe it's, as you said, Heather, talk to a coworker. Maybe it's talk to your boss. Maybe it's take that vision and create a more tangible sense of what is different between what's true now and what you want, and get really crystal clear on how those changes could look and feel, who's responsible, which stakeholders. So there's many different ways to come about it. But if you simply ask, what is the change I seek, from what to what? What does it feel like when that change is true? And what's one thing I can do this week to make that change come true? It's very, very powerful. So that, even though it seems really impossible, like, wait, what? It's like, no, it's right in us, waiting to be remembered. I want to get to one of the questions that's come up here. And
Let
oh,
me just
sorry, Heather, did you want to reflect?
jump in.
Please
Yeah,
go
and
for it.
say that I think there's a third path as well, because when I mentioned leaving and you mentioned staying, for the reasons that you said to stay, I think there's another reason to stay. And that would be that if you've built really good relationships and a sense of community, and this could be if you're a teacher in a school, or you're a waiter at a restaurant, or you work in sustainability in a company, like, it doesn't matter where you are. If you've built really good relationships and community, that could be where your purpose is to nurture those relationships and support one another in how we're going to face all of this uncertainty and all of the crises to come. So I think that is a completely valid reason to stay somewhere, because of relationships. And someone who says, I can't leave, I have to stay, there's probably a lot of those people who were funded by USAID who thought the same, and then it crashed around them and they no longer have their jobs. So there is no such thing as a forever job. And so it might be taken out of your hands, whether you get to stay or not. And so I think being quite grounded in your values means that no matter where you are, you will know what your purpose is. And so I just wanted to offer that there is, like, a way where staying in a job that you see all the problems doesn't mean that you would need to leave that job. Like, even if you thought, like, I can't change it, you might, like in a school, like the way the school system works, it's really hard to change that. But you could be staying because of relationships. And I think that is, like, as human beings, that is the most important thing for us, is to have really good relationships. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I really appreciate you lifting that up. And I want to just triple underscore something I said a few minutes ago. Might have sounded glib, but I really meant it sincerely. Like, this isn't a judgment of, like, oh my God, I can't believe you stay in that job, or oh my God, I can't believe you left. There's as many humans as there are. There's probably that times 10 reasons to make the choices we make. And I don't think there is a right or wrong here. I sometimes am a little hard on my 20 years worth of self that stayed and continually clonked my head against the edges of the sustainability reality, where I was like, this isn't fixing things. And part of me is like, why did I keep repeating myself and asking the questions over and over and allow my own soul's boundaries to be crunched and trampled and gaslit and all the things? And then another part of me is like, I'm really glad I did that, because boy, have I gained amazing insight into how a number of global industries work. And I'm so grateful for the relationships, exactly as you say. And now that I'm on the outside of that, or like I'm outside but still keep a little thread of connection, I feel very honored to have the conversations I have with folks who are still there, working very, very hard to genuinely make change. So Yeah, like no judgment, really no judgment. Like we are all living our best lives that we can in this moment. And to your job security thing, to your job security point, I want to also remember, without naming names, the number of times where folks like were so committed to their jobs and worked so hard and didn't leave in spite of many reservations, only to be shuffled into some other broom closet or all the way out the door. And so, at the end of the day, corporations are not human beings. They are run by human beings and they are run by amazing human beings in many cases, but they are not human beings. And so at the end of the day, like we're it, and we do our best to decide every day. So maybe that empowers a few folks to make the leap into some of those conversations. Which brings me to something that's being raised in the chat. So I just want to pull that up a bit, and I'll offer a little bit of commentary, and then I'm curious what you think, Heather, as well. So I'm going to combine a couple pieces because Renee, I think some of what you're pulling up is very interconnected. So you ask, you mention you encourage leaders to support safe spaces and to model the vulnerability, to name the gaps and pain of this, and that most CSOs don't seem that attuned. And you're asking if we agree. And then in a later comment, you note that having a container is vital, like a safe space to have this conversation, and that visioning and imagination is a lot more emotionally vulnerable than we acknowledge in the sustainability space. And so my simple answer to that is agree 100%. And a few bits of texture on that. So I'm noticing a couple shifts. So, I mean, maybe it's you notice what's around you, and I've more and more been surrounded by people who would like to have this conversation. So I'm noticing an increasing openness to vulnerability. I'm noticing, like I was gonna say like maybe in the last 3 years, but you know what? I'm gonna say amplifying in the last 3 weeks and like last 3 days, like things seem to be really gaining momentum, which is exciting. There's I think sometimes it can be commodified, like, we need more mindfulness retreats, but I think a lot of it is an increasing recognition from a wider swath of humanity, including those within corporate decision-making spaces, that vulnerability is part of life and not to be stamped out. And so I'll share where I see that in a few spaces, while strongly agreeing that it does need to be modeled, there does need to be a safe space for it. But at the end of the day, corporations aren't well designed for that. So we have to, let me muddle for a moment. We can talk about this stuff, like we here, Heather and I, and you joining us, can talk about this stuff really openly and clearly because it's really obvious. Like as one of you said earlier, like we're talking about the obvious, and it is obvious. Like we have feelings, we have needs. It's important to have a purpose and work in alignment with it, not be gaslit. Like these things are just basic everyday things. And then there's what goes on within a lot of companies. I mean, it's not a shocker that there's like widely watched comedy, like The Office, right? I think of the show, the British and American version of The Office. The reason that's so funny is because it's true, right? Like our art emerges from our pain points, especially our comedic art. And it's funny to watch it, but it's not funny to live it in real life. And it is real life. So I point that out to say, yes, leaders, I think, can and should model vulnerability and model that it's okay. But at the end of the day, I learned, and I encourage others to go as far as they can with this. If I have to wait for somebody else to make it safe for me to be vulnerable, in some camps, I may be waiting an awfully long time. And so either I just have to decide not safe to proceed, my safety is more important, I'm going to back up, or not sure if it's safe to proceed, but I'm going in anyway. And two things can happen there. And one might be that I go in and I get a little bonked around and it's not very fun. Oh well, I'm still alive, I'm still breathing. It's probably not for folks in an awkward sustainability conversation, it's probably not life and death. There are places where things could be life and death. That's not what I'm talking about here. But the more likely instance is that someone else in the room, maybe even the person you're talking directly to, goes, I'm really glad you brought that up. That's been on the back of my mind too. Or I've been hearing this and yeah, help me understand this more. And so I guess the deeper offer I would put here is to notice how we use the word leader. And here's a pattern I'm spotting. We're often describing leaders when we mean the person with the most senior job and the biggest paycheck. And so where I would like to see leaders is moving in front into new, like breaking new ground and inviting others to try that too. And that can be anyone. So there may not be a safe container. There may not be a more compensated person with a more senior title modeling the way. And that is like, quite candidly, that's what led me to ask Heather to join me on this call to say, like, because this is the main reality that many people are facing, and we want to move forward anyway. So how do we do it? So yeah, I don't know, Heather, if you want to build on that or
Yeah. Just your point about leadership. Yeah, for me, leadership is about how to bring out the best thinking of everybody. And so that person can be anywhere in a company, anywhere in an organization. So anyone listening to this is can potentially be a leader if they're working on how to bring out the best thinking in everybody, because any kind of new ideas, visionary thoughts are going to come from getting as many perspectives as possible, which is why we need to work on racism, ableism, sexism, all of that, because the way that our culture it is like it requires conformity to a particular way of doing things. And I love referring to Tima Okun's 18 white supremacy culture patterns, which are like, you don't even have to have that name. You can call them common organizational patterns like sense of urgency, um, fear of conflict. These patterns at the basis are the basis of why we are not able to make those big changes that we want to make. And so, yeah, about that. And then I'm seeing in the chat a lot of resonance with relationships, and Lorraine, you mentioned how institutions, like companies aren't humans. And here's a little preview that this afternoon I'm going to be recording with my co-host Chris a episode of our podcast Morning Tinto. And I've prepared what I'm going to say, and I am going to be talking just about that, about how institutions aren't humans, and they're not able to replace what humans do as humans for one another. So I'll throw that link in the description and everything later as well. It'll be published later today, but we're going to record that in a couple of hours.
Awesome. I love it. And anyone who hasn't been listening to Heather and Chris's podcast, it's very heart opening. I feel like it challenges me. I often feel like, oh, another thing I need to pay close attention to and improve, frankly. I think you call us to a higher level, but with grace, actually. So I encourage anyone to who hasn't yet given a listen, and we'll make sure again that referenced resources are easy to find in the recorded version of this. And speaking of grace, I wanted to pick up on something that I'm seeing in the chat here. Cynthia, thank you. I love that you highlight this is a journey, right? And this is not near the beginning of this conversation, Heather, you talked about ways in which we can create the conditions to have these conversations. And I want to bring that back up here because the journey, it's fun to say like it's a journey, not a destination. Well, a journey is made up of many, many pieces. And so this flies in the face of a lot of those cultural patterns we see in companies, which is like, what's the answer? What's the roadmap? What are the key milestones? What's the strategy? And I can appreciate why for many things, we want a map and we want clarity, and we want everyone to be on the same page and agree on what we're doing. But for something as complex as the transformation of global industrial systems to end harmful, oppressive patterns in service of profit and reform into ways in which our needs and wants are delivered on while enabling us to be healthy and while restoring ecosystems, that is so fundamentally different from where we are now that to expect that anyone has a roadmap with key performance indicators, that's not practical and realistic, right? So when we go into these journeys, wherever we are, there is such an opportunity for grace. And I want to offer an extra like syllable, it's two syllables, with grace, which is humor. Like both humor yourself, like just give yourself the like, what the heck, let's give it a go. But also, like, this is a cosmic joke on many levels. Like, let it flow as an experiment, as a way to try different things on, as part of the human drama. And don't take the experiments too seriously, especially your own. You're trying different ways on, and it is vulnerable, but it's also very possible. There's people making transformational uh, strides in their own lives and in their own companies all the time. So I think the grace can be paired with humor, and then all kinds of amazing things can happen. There's one other comment I wanted to quickly pick up on, and then I'll maybe, as we're coming to the top of the hour, there's a delay on the recording. So I think we're coming to the top of the hour. I don't know where you guys are, but we'll take a few minutes to maybe give some parting thoughts and ideas. So if you have any last questions, please don't hesitate to pop them into the chat. I also just wanted to pick up on one other thing I'm seeing in the chat. Thank you, Lisa. Great to see you here. I miss you. And you were raising this notion of around the stability or the lack thereof that a lot of people are sensing right now. And I think that's really important to be aware of. Like, these are not simple times, and I think many people are feeling that increasingly. Uh, this for me prompts a few things. So Lisa, how like even more relationships are important, and I think that's true. And I want to highlight an excuse I sometimes see coming at us that pretends that relationship thing isn't key, which is like now is not the time to ruffle feathers, right? Now is not the time to complicate or ask for more or try to change things. And I want to call that a little bit of weather reporting and say, like, actually, if there ever were a time, it's now. There's no better time than now to invite your soul in from the parking lot or go meet them, like one way or the other, get back together. And also, well, it feels like complicated times for many people. Like the country where I live, we just got a new prime minister and we're about to have a national election, and it's kind of a complicated time. That's a parallel to many other parts of the world. And
And you're
um,
about to become US citizens. I mean,
oh
it's
yeah, that's
all
right.
going on at the same time.
Hey, American, I wasn't even going to go there. And so these are really complicated times. And also, it's been really complicated times for a lot of people in a lot of parts of the world for a very long time. So, like, in some ways, I feel like the complexity that's being lifted up and highlighted is either yet another theme. I'm going to be blunt for a moment, like a theme of the oppressor. Like, don't let it's complicated be the reason you don't make real change, because it's been complicated before, it's always complicated, or it's actually quite simple. Like, it's always a good time to reunite with your soul and do work that feels aligned, period. My 2 cents on that. And yet, it is important to be aware of the context that things are feeling extra dicey and extra unstable for a lot of people. And so that I feel like that emphasizes what you said a little bit earlier, Heather, that like it's not about quitting or not quitting. It can very much be about just those powerful relationships that you have, and that nurturing those and staying true to them may be the most central part of your purpose. And that's okay too. Um, yeah, I wonder as we're sort of rounding the top of the hour, if Heather, if you have any sort of closing remarks or maybe an invitation or call to action or anything else you'd
Yeah.
like to add in.
Yeah, April 8th, um, I'm going to be part of a team of a couple of other coaches who are running an event, um, 10 a.m. Eastern. It's called Supporting Livelihoods in Uncertain Times. So it's for folks who are, yeah, looking for work, looking for more clients, trying to launch an idea, trying to pivot, do a career pivot, or it could be that they're trying to ground themselves more in their values and working towards a vision. Everyone's welcome to that. It's on a sliding scale from 0 to 250 US dollars, depending what people are able and willing to pay. I'll put the link in there as well, because that is speaking to, what Cynthia and Lisa say around, um, and what everyone's saying, that these are, I mean, that says it in the title, supporting livelihoods in uncertain times. Just people are feeling that more, and people are kind of really hungry for a shared felt sense of being in this together and not feeling isolated in the face of everything that happens, including, like you say, things like genocide in various parts of the world, and the um, US aid, what's happened, etc., etc. This is so visceral. It's always been visceral, like you said, for some people. But it's becoming more visceral for people who thought they were maybe immune to it. And so having that kind of, like, I really enjoy, it really means a lot to me to be able to create spaces for people to be able to open up about this, be in relationship with each other, and feel supported as they go through this. And it's been a real pleasure talking to you, Lorraine, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Closing
Thank
thoughts.
you. Thank you. And just before I jump in more fully, can you remind people how they can find you?
Yeah, I guess the easiest thing is kdoozy.org. I'll put that in the chat while you're speaking. That's like the quickest way to find me. But I also plan to put in there the registration link for the Supporting Livelihoods event, as well as a link to the podcast, as well as a link to those resources that I spoke about at the beginning. So if you didn't hear the beginning, if you just go back and listen to the beginning of this recording, you will hear me mention nonviolent global liberation, which is where, like, the vision mobilization process can be found, as well as convergent facilitation. Um, and so, yeah, just want to make sure that people can find those resources.
Awesome. Thank you. And I really encourage all of you who are listening or watching the recording to take a closer look at what Heather's doing. I have benefited so greatly. I feel constantly called to a uh, higher delivery on my own capacities, and you make your work very accessible. So there's so much available very generously. So thank you. And I guess if I were going to offer a closing thought, it would just be to I guess I want to share how much easier it is to do this than I might have feared. So, in a corporate context, talking about things that seem impossible is as simple as talking about them. And some of the energy and power of the taboo is just the energy I might give it. And as with many difficult conversations, if you enter, when I have entered them with intention, and the intention being to improve understanding between myself and the people I'm talking to, and understand their perspective, and have an opportunity to share mine, while holding a vision but not forcing it or insisting it, just holding that as what drives my intention. I have been pleasantly relieved and surprised in 100% of the times I've done it. When that hasn't happened, it's been because I've gone in with a kind of insistence. I need to convince these people. They don't understand, and I do, and I need to tell them. But that's not grounded in alignment. That's not grounded in that expansive vision. And we talked about a few ways of doing that in this call. That's grounded in like worry, fear, control, a bunch of impulses that, I've been raised in those conditions. But when I recognize that and step aside and come back to the more aligned vision that I hold of shifting into an economy that truly serves life, and then inviting my own voice into that vision in those conversations that might be difficult, it really has been 100% of the time relieving and so much easier than I thought. So I just want to leave you with that sort of sense of possibility. I thank folks very much for your attention and really neat questions and comments that have come up in the chat. If you're interested in getting more involved with what I'm up to, I send out a weekly letter every Thursday usually, so go to blorrainesmith.com to sign up. I'm also hosting my next workshop series, which is coming up soon. That's for folks who really want to go deep in bringing reality into ESG and reality. There's lots more information on my website there in the events and downloads section. And I'd love to hear from you. What's working well for you? Where do you see these challenges and these sort of hiccups with reality as we work towards a more sustainable, equitable, and truly life-affirming economic paradigm, which I think we are building. We're doing it together, but it's taking some thinking and imagining. So with that, I'll bring us to a close. Much gratitude, Heather, and all of you listening either today or into the future. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye for now. Bye.